today I am going to apologize up front because on this episode, I am going to get a lot wonkier than I typically do with economic data. But there are a couple of things that we need to really discuss right now. And one of them we're going to tackle in this episode, the other one we'll tackle in a future episode. And today's is going to be all about tariffs and what is going on with President Trump and these tariffs that he is implementing and then pulling back and then implementing and pulling back. And a lot of people are calling it chaos from the White House. But I will give you my take on it. I do not believe it is chaos because I see exactly what's going on. A lot of large investors that I know and real estate entrepreneurs that I know have identified the same thing that I have. We understand it because we are negotiators too. Not at his level, obviously, but I understand negotiation when I see it. And that is the way I see these tariffs. My podcast was designed to help new and seasoned investors and entrepreneurs break free from the financial confusion by sharing real-world investing and business strategies they can use to build lasting wealth and freedom. So we're going to dive right into all of this tariff talk. And I'm going to start, though, with an article that I pulled. And this one was a real eye catcher, right? It was clickbait for sure. And the article says America headed for an economic heart attack on government debt and spending, warns billionaire. So obviously, I've got to click on that one and see what is all about here. And the billionaire that is interviewed for this article is Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates. So he is certainly a reputable person to listen to. But listen to the article and exactly what he says. I love this because these weren't quotes. They wrote verbatim what he said in this interview on the Fox Business Network's Clayman Countdown. I'm not familiar with that particular show, but at any rate, here's what he says. Ray Dalio says we are spending 40% more than we're taking in, and this is a chronic problem. I don't think anybody could disagree with that. Imagine if you in your household or your business spent 40% more than you were taking in each month or each year. I think we could all agree that that is a problem, right? That is a huge problem. So I have no problem with what he's saying here. He says, so now what you're seeing is debt service payments squeezing away. And he says, it's like plaque in your arteries squeezing away your buying power. Totally agree. And I'm glad somebody with some reputation is out there in the public, in the national media talking about this. He says, as you can do the numbers and see that you could have an economic heart attack as a result of that, we're going to very soon get into a position that you need debt to pay for debt. Now, I would argue that we're probably already in that position, and we've been in that position for quite some time. He says, we're at a juncture right now that if we can soon, very soon, while the economy is still good, cut the deficit to 3% of GDP, which is possible. You only have to change a couple of things. You've got to change your spending by 4%, change income tax by 4%. Then you'll have lower interest rates as a result. This is possible. It was done between 1991 and 1998. That balance, if everybody gives a little, there's a possibility of being able to get it down to 3%. If you don't do that, and we probably won't, it's like plaque building in the heart. And so we are now then going to not only have more debt and more debt service encroaching on our spending, but it also means you're going to have a supply-demand problem. Now, I cannot disagree one single bit with what Ray Dalio said in this interview. In fact, it's the same thing Elon Musk has been saying. It's the same thing Jamie Dimon has been saying from Chase. There are a lot of guys with a lot of smarts that have been saying this. Unfortunately, this has been going on for a long time, and people of value, people whose opinion is valued, are just now, over the last 6 to 12 months, starting to speak up about this, and it's becoming a mainstream topic. But let's go back a little bit in history and say, why are we where we are? How big of a problem is this really that Ray Dalio is talking about? Well, as of today, the United States owes $36.2 trillion in debt. 29 million of that is public debt, and 7.18 trillion of it is intra-government holdings. That combined makes up 122% of our annual GDP, or gross domestic product. That is way higher than we would want it to be to have a healthy country, a healthy economy, and for our debt to be healthy. What do I mean by debt being healthy? If your debt is not healthy, it means people have a suspicion of whether it can be paid back or not. That is unhealthy debt. As a lender, when I'm doing a loan for somebody on a piece of real estate, I promise you, I'm looking at that loan saying, can they pay it back? And if they can't pay it back, or if I think there is a higher propensity, they may not be able to pay it back, what am I going to do? I'm going to do one of two things. I promise you. There's only two options. I'm going to either say no and not do the loan, or I'm going to charge them more. I'm going to say your debt is riskier than another file. Therefore, I'm going to charge you more for that extra risk. And that is what we're seeing today with the U.S. government debt. Now, our president is blaming the Fed funds rate for the cost of our debt. And to a small degree, that may be true, but I would blame our current debt situation more for the cost of our debt than I would the Fed funds rate, because let's be honest, the Fed funds rate doesn't change Treasury rate, the Treasury yields, okay? That's an auction. Market volatility got you stressed. One day you're up, the next day you're down. It's enough to make anyone lose sleep. That's why smart investors are looking beyond traditional stocks and bonds to diversify their portfolio. What makes ILS Capital different? While stocks and bonds swing with market emotions, our investment funds are backed by real estate notes, actual loans secured by real property. This means your investment isn't tied to Wall Street sentiment or corporate earnings reports. Instead, it's connected to tangible assets that people need, homes and commercial buildings. Real estate notes have historically provided more predictable returns because they're based on actual property values and loan payments, not market speculation. It's a completely different approach to building wealth. Ready to add some stability to your investment strategy? Visit ILS Capital at ilscapitalfunds.com/diversify. That's ilscapitalfunds.com/diversify, and learn how our real estate notes backed funds can help balance your portfolio. Investment involves risks, including potential loss of principal. Past performance does not guarantee future results. Please carefully consider investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses before investing. When the federal government puts treasuries up for sale, bonds for sale, it's an auction. And if people look at those treasuries and say, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it. I got a lot of U.S. treasuries right now in my portfolio, and the U.S. government is $36 trillion in debt. I don't know that I want any more U.S. treasuries. That's not a function of the Fed funds rate at all. It's a function of the health of the U.S. treasuries. So I digress a little bit. We are currently 36.2 trillion in debt in the United States. Now, let's talk about trillion. I've said before, as Americans, we get our millions, billions, and trillions all screwed up. It's hard to keep them straight. They sound somewhat alike. What's the difference between a million and a billion? And what's the difference between a million and a trillion? It's just hard to say. So I looked it up and I said, what could we use on a podcast for people to understand the magnitude of $36.2 trillion of debt? So here's the deal. If you have 1 million seconds, that equates to 12 days. 1 million seconds is 12 days. So I'm going to give you a pop quiz. How many days do you think 1 billion seconds are? What would 1 billion seconds add up to? If 1 million adds up to 12 days, how many days would 1 billion add up to? And the answer is 31 years. 1 billion seconds adds up to 31 years, not days, years. Well, if 1 billion seconds adds up to 31 years, how many years does 1 trillion seconds add up to? And the answer is quite easy. 31,700 years is 1 trillion seconds. So 1 million is 12 days, 1 billion is 31 years, and 1 trillion is 31,700 years. So when you hear that the United States is 36.2 trillion in debt, it's a big damn deal. Okay, that is a massive number. It is a number that is incomprehensible to everybody on this podcast, including me. That's how far in debt we are. How long did it take us to get there? 24 years. The last time the United States had a balanced budget was 2001. It was the last year we had a balanced budget. We have spent more than we have taken in revenue every single year since 2021, or for so far 24 years, counting this year, because obviously 2025, where we sit today, there is no way it will be balanced. So, if Ray Dalio is right, and we are positioned for a massive heart attack, and it has taken us 24 years to get here, and we're 36 trillion in debt, and we're adding, by the way, fiscal year 2024, we added 1.9 trillion in debt on top of what we were already in debt prior to 2024. So we added almost 2 trillion just last year. We're expected to add another 1.5 trillion or so this year. And I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Now let's talk about tariffs, because I think the two are inextricably linked. Ray Dalio in this article said, we could get there easy. We could get there easy. All we have to do is, and then he says, we could cut the deficit to 3% of GDP, which is possible. You only have to change a few things. Change spending by 4% and tax income by 4%. Then you'll have lower interest rate as a result. This is easy. It can be done. Now, but he predicts, rightfully, I think, but they won't do it. And no, we won't do it. We can't cut spending by 3% or 4%. We can't cut spending 1%. There is not a will in Congress to cut spending. I said on a prior episode, there is always going to be somebody that says, no, we can't cut that because it hurts my state or my district. There is not a single bit of government spending that doesn't have a constituency that will fight for it. So we can't cut spending. Now, we could cut the rate of growth on the spending, which is what we do in Washington, by the way, and call it a cut. Instead of growing spending by X, we've only grown it this much, and then you'll see headlines in the news that we've cut spending. No, we didn't. We haven't cut spending in decades. What we do is cut the rate of growth of spending and call it a cut. Okay. The other thing that he says here is we could grow our tax receipts by 4%. Well, what does that mean? That means higher taxes. And then he says, if we did that, we'd get lower interest rates. I would argue that might be true, because if you increase taxes substantially, you're going to get less GDP, you're going to get less job creation. And when you have less job creation, unemployment rises, and then the Fed would have to cut interest rates. I think that's true. That's absolutely true. But that's not the direction the current administration has chosen to go. I believe they have chosen to tariff our way out of debt, or at least out of deficits. I don't think you could tariff your way out of debt, not when there's that big number of 36.2 trillion. But it would be a good start if we could at least stop adding to that, right? You know, when you have a spending problem in your home or your business, the first thing you need to do is stop adding to it. Once you've accomplished that first goal, then you can look at, now, how do I get rid of what I've already accumulated? And I think that's exactly what we're seeing out of Washington today with tariffs. Now, I'll talk about the history of tariffs, first of all, because they are intended, I just did a quick Wikipedia search on tariffs, says they are intended for multiple purposes, three primary purposes: to raise revenue for the government. Well, isn't that what we need right now? We need more revenue, since we have an addiction to spending and can't stop that. More revenue is a good thing, yes? They can also be used to restrict imports and protect domestic producers from foreign competition. Doesn't that sound familiar? I think I've heard the current administration talking about bringing jobs back. Onshoring is a term that I've heard frequently over the last 6 months to a year. Onshoring, bringing manufacturing back to the United States and starting what was that term I heard? A golden age of employment creation in this country. Well, it says here in Wikipedia that is absolutely one of the three purposes of tariffs. And then, of course, the third one is to reach reciprocity agreements that reduce trade barriers. And interestingly enough, I think the current administration has been calling these tariffs, I may look here. Yep, they use the word reciprocity in these tariffs. In other words, they're using these tariffs to get foreign governments to reduce the trade barriers for our companies and our ranchers and our farmers. Now, if we look at a chart of tariffs, and I know I told you I was going to get wonky on this, I pulled a chart that goes clear back to 1792 on tariffs in this country. And in 1792, the average tariff percentage was 15.1 for incoming goods into the United States. I'll just go clear up here to 1946. After World War II, we were looking at 7.7%, 1948, 5.5, 1950, 4.5. So you can see post-World War II, tariffs dramatically decreased. The highest tariff year I've seen on the chart was 1870, when we tariffed other countries 44.6% to send goods into the United States. There were a lot of years in the 30s. My point in going back that far is what we're seeing right now is not abnormal. It is not out of the realm. In 2024, the United States had an average tariff of 14.5%. That is certainly in line when you go back and look at a couple hundred years, but it is not in line if you just look at post-World War II, really, even prior to World War II. Tariffs in 1930 were 19.2%. 1935, they were 15.6, still higher than last year. 1940, they dropped to 12.6. So my point is, after World War II, tariffs started dropping exponentially in the United States. And in particular, they really started dropping 1980. Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush really believed in globalization and lowering the trade barriers so that other countries could send their goods and services to the United States. In 1980, tariffs were dropped to 2.9%. And then you fast forward to 2010, it was 1.3%. We were dropping our trade barriers and letting people flood the United States. It was called globalization. And there was a political motive in it, that there was a belief in the Reagan administration and the first Bush administration, probably the second too, that if we lowered trade barriers and allowed other countries to bring goods and services to the United States for our consumption, that we could create other countries' middle class for them, and that they would be more stable governments, and that there would be less worldwide strife. Let's face it, when a country reaches an economic status where they have a middle class, there's less strife, there's less war, there's less problems. So it was this globalist idea that if we don't charge them and they can just flood our market with goods and services, that all these other countries around the world will get better, they will get nicer, they'll get stabler, and so forth. And I'm not saying that was wrong. That was just the mindset, right or wrong. But in 2024, we're back up to 14.5% in tariffs. And in 2025, I don't know, because that is a moving target, as the media loves to talk about. Now let's talk about 2000 to present. There were a couple of studies done. One, I won't go through who did them. A guy named Otter, another one Dorn, and another one Hansen, showed that increased trade with China actually cost Americans around 1 million manufacturing jobs in the 16 years between 1991 and 2007. These Chinese imports led to a manufacturing job losses and declining wages. No kidding. No kidding. Of course it did. They also found that offsetting job gains in other industries never materialized. Now, folks, I'll be 60 later this year, so I've lived through this time frame as an adult, and I can tell you that that's what we were told with NAFTA. That's what we were told with other trade agreements prior to NAFTA, that if we trade with all these other countries, yes, we're going to lose the manufacturing jobs, but you know what? That's okay, because we're going to go from an industrialized nation to a, what was it that they called it back then? An information and technology nation is what they said we were going to become. And yes, we're going to lose these lower paying manufacturing jobs, but we're going to gain all these other jobs and all these other industries. And what we see here from this report, at least, is that never materialized. closed companies. Goes on to say, and there's another report by other economists. I can't even pronounce his name, and Brendan Price estimated that competition from Chinese imports cost the United States as many as 2.4 million jobs in the 12 years between 1999 and 2011. So basically, we've got two studies from overlapping timeframes that are telling us the same thing, which is something we already knew, that yes, China and the massive amount of trade deficit we've had with China has cost us massive amounts of jobs. Now, let's go to the first Trump presidency. The first Trump tariffs were imposed by an executive order, not by an act of Congress, during the first Trump presidency as part of his economic policy. In January 18, he imposed tariffs on solar panels, washing machines of up to 30 to 50%. He soon imposed tariffs also on steel at 25% and aluminum at 10% from most countries. Then, on June of that same year, 2018, this was extended on to the European Union, Canada, and Mexico. Separately, in May, he also set tariffs of 25% on 818 categories of goods from China worth $50 billion in fiscal 2023. Now, think about what is going on here. Trump slammed these big tariffs, 30%, 50%, 25%, the lowest 10%. Now, we'll fast forward 2 years. I'm giving you a crash history lesson on tariffs. Now, May 2024, we're talking about Joe Biden. The Biden administration doubled tariffs. Wait a minute. Let me read that again. The Biden administration doubled the Trump tariffs on solar cells imported from China and more than tripled tariffs on lithium-ion electric vehicle batteries imported from China. The administration, the Biden administration we're talking about now, also raised tariffs on imports of Chinese steel, aluminum, and medical equipment. Whoa, wait a minute. I never saw this headline. This was not national media. Joe Biden slammed, doubled the Trump tariffs of the first Trump administration and left them in place. Now, all I hear when I hear about tariffs today is Trump's trade war, Trump's tariff war, Trump's, everything's Trump's tariffs. What we're seeing here is, yeah, he started it. He started it in his first administration. But Joe Biden actually increased it from there. He didn't get rid of any of Trump's tariffs when he had the opportunity because, as we read, this was not done by act of Congress. This was done by executive order. It could have been undone by executive order by the Biden administration just as easily, but it was not. Instead, he doubled tariffs on solar cells and tripled them on lithium-ion electric vehicle batteries. Then he also raised his own tariffs on Chinese steel, aluminum, and medical equipment. So this is not just a Trump thing. Now, the second Trump presidency, here we go. Liberation Day tariffs. During his second presidency, he has imposed a series of steep protective tariffs affecting nearly all U.S. imports. Between January and April 25, the average effective U.S. tariff rose from 2.5% to an estimated 27%, the highest level in over a century. I've got the chart here to prove they are right. It is the highest in over a century. But is it a bad thing? I don't know yet. So I did a little research here again. I want to know, what are countries charging us for tariffs? Picture this. You found the perfect investment property. The numbers work, the location is ideal, but your traditional bank wants 60 days to close and treats your rental property like it's some risky gamble they've never seen before. Sound familiar? Here's the thing. Most banks just don't understand real estate investing. They're built for home buyers, not investors. And that's where Investor Loan Source comes in. We're a financing company created specifically by and for real estate investors. We know what rental income looks like. We understand fix and flip timelines, and we get that commercial deals move fast. Whether you're doing buy and hold rentals, fix and flip projects, or commercial acquisitions, we speak your language and we can close in days, not months. Stop explaining your business to bankers who just don't get it. Visit ils.cash/fast. That's ils.cash/fast and work with lenders who understand real estate investing. What is China, let's say, charging us for tariffs? Well, as I look here, China last year, here we go. China in 2024 charged an average tariff on the United States of 32.6% on 100% of all goods imported. Let me read that again. China in 2024 charged an average tariff on all U.S. goods imported from the United States to China of 32.6%. So today, as we sit, the media is just wringing their hands that we may be charging by the end of this year 27% tariff. Last year was 14.4, thanks to both the first Trump administration and the Biden administration. And yeah, we might hit 27% this year, while at the same time, we're being charged 32.6% by China alone. Are these tariffs a bad thing? I don't know. I don't know if they're a bad thing. I don't know if they're a good thing. But it seems to me that if we're being charged 32% to take our goods and services into China, seems fair to me that we might want to charge them a similar number to bring their crap here. I don't know. It just seems like that might be a good thing. Now, a lot of people are saying, yeah, but Tom, all these tariffs, if you charge China to bring in their goods and services here, well, then we'll have to pay more as Americans for our crap that we buy from China. And I know that's been said over and over and over by every economist and every media pundit. It's going to cause inflation. It's going to cause inflation. It's going to cause inflation. In fact, I've got a article here that Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, says he's got to hold on and leave rates where they are because they're not sure what Trump's tariffs and trade war is going to do. He is literally saying, we don't know what's going to happen, but we think it's going to raise prices, cause inflation, all these tariffs, and we've got to hang on. We got to hang on. We got to leave rates right where they are. And I have said over and over, I don't think we need to lower interest rates yet. I'm not in favor of doing that. I don't think it's going to change the things that a lot of people in investing and a lot of people in real estate think it's going to. Rates were lowered. The Fed funds rate, that's all that the Federal Reserve can do is lower the Fed funds rate. And that was lowered a full percentage point last year. And yet The 30-year mortgage did not lower at all. In fact, it's hovered within the same 30 basis point window that it was in prior to the Fed funds rate dropping a full point. So I'm not sitting here advocating for the Fed to lower interest rates. That will be the topic of another episode here very shortly. But right now, that's what's going on. Everybody is sitting back saying these tariffs are going to raise prices. They have to. We're being told they have to. And we were told just like inflation a couple of years ago was, oh, we're not causing inflation because of all the government spending with COVID. That's not going to cause inflation. Yes, it did. But then we were told when we saw, yes, it is causing inflation, the Fed came out and said, yes, but it's transitory. They made up this fancy word to say, yeah, but it's not going to be here long. It's transitory. Then, of course, Chairman Powell had to come out later and say, we were wrong. I don't think he used those exact words. I can't imagine those coming out of a Fed chairman's mouth. But he said, we may have been misguided a little, and they weren't as transitory as we thought they were. I think that is the same thing that we are going to hear in retrospect on tariffs causing inflation. I don't think it's going to cause inflation. As I said on a previous episode, people will change their purchasing habits. And I used my car as an example. I drive a little Land Rover Defender. And if there was a massive tariff on that vehicle that increased the price beyond my threshold of comfort, I would have simply bought a different vehicle, one that wasn't tariffed so high. And if there were enough tariffs on enough vehicles, I would have probably bought an American-made car, right? That's changing people's habits. And that's what these tariffs will do. They will change people's buying habits. They will also create a massive opportunity for growth of American jobs, as many companies have already announced they're going to reshore or onshore a lot of jobs. So now, with that as the backdrop, we find an article from the Council of Economic Advisors. Now, when I read an article, I always have to figure out who is writing this article and what is their motive for this article. I don't take articles at face value because everybody has an agenda. So, full disclosure, the CEA is actually an administration. It's part of the administration under the president. So we've got to take this with a grain of salt. Now, this new report from the Council of Economic Advisors contradicts a lot of the experts and has found, they say they have found, that imported goods have actually, the prices of imported goods have actually fallen this year and not increased. Now, that's interesting. So I dig in and I say, what the heck is this talking about? And basically, it says this. This report breaks down both of the inflation indexes that we use most, the PCE, which is the Consumer Expenditure Index, and the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, rather, and the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index. It breaks these down, and here's what they found. Overall goods priced in the PCE jumped by 0.4% from December through May, which corresponds to an annual 1% increase. Meanwhile, imported components, so what they did is they took these indexes and they broke it down between domestic product and imported product, and they found that in the PCE, prices dropped by 0.1% during that same time frame. So then they did the same thing with CPI. Consumer Price Index showed that imported goods dipped 0.8% while overall goods remained flat. This is very fascinating. They said there are several differences between these two indexes, which is why they used both and dissected both. The indexes are different by scope of products included and the weighting methodologies. They're arguing that since they found a similar pattern for both, it highlights the robustness of these results. I would argue that if this data is correct, they would be right. Now, do we know if it's correct? Well, we don't know if it's exactly correct because the CPI and the PCE don't break down by domestic and imported. But we do know this. Inflation has not reared its head in the headline numbers or the core numbers of either index, because I've got a list here of both of those numbers going back to February, and the PCE has looked like this in headline numbers: 2.7, 2.3, 2.2, 2.3, 2.3 for the last 5 months. In the CPI headline numbers, 2.8, 2.4, 2.3, 2.4. Again, headline numbers for CPI. So with the headline numbers running the way they are, it is very conceivable and very believable that this report is accurate and that imported goods are not rising in cost at all. And in fact, they could be slightly decreasing. So this will be interesting, I'm sure, because these numbers certainly show the story that the administration wants to show. They will continue to put this report out monthly, and as they do, we'll continue to keep an eye on it and see if that, in fact, stays the same. So I think I've gotten into the weeds far enough on tariffs. My overall sense on tariffs: Trump is using these tariffs to bludgeon other countries into doing what he wants them to do. He's using it to beat Mexico over the head, to get them to do more to stop fentanyl from crossing the border into our country. He's using it with the EU to get them to lower some of the non-tariff barriers on our auto industry. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. I think I've beat this horse long enough. But if you really want to dive into what I'm talking about non-tariff barriers, tariffs are just one way a government can protect their domestic industry from imports. It's one of the big ways, but it's not the only way. And if you just do a quick AI or Google search on non-tariff barriers, you can see that there are a lot of other ways that a foreign nation will put barriers up for the United States and for our companies and for our ranchers and our farmers, and to try to keep us from being able to get our products into their markets. And Trump's just said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. You know what? If you're going to keep those barriers up for our people, we're just going to tariff you. We're going to tariff your companies. And the good news for us as Americans is we have the biggest market. We're the biggest buyers of products from around the country, from around the world. So I think this is a negotiation that he is going to win. I think this is a negotiation that we're going to be much better off for. And it's a negotiation that we are already winning if you look at what the tariffs are doing for the debt in this country. I did a quick search here because I saw that in June, the U.S. brought in more money than it spent in June. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. With $36.2 trillion of debt, we don't typically bring in more than we spend. We spend more than we bring in. We've been doing that for 24 years, right? 25 years almost. Yeah, do a quick search here. The United States brought in more money than it spent in June 2025, recording a budget surplus of just over $27 billion with a B. This was a significant turnaround from the previous month's deficit of $316 billion. So we went in 1 month from a $316 billion deficit to a $27 billion surplus. This surplus was unexpectedly achieved, it says, due to, drumroll, a sharp increase in receipts, particularly driven by tariffs. Now, are tariffs all bad? I don't know, but I'm starting to see some good things about them. So my conclusion on tariffs is there is no reason to be fearful. It is not as chaotic as it looks. I believe the administration is using this as a tool to get other countries to drop their non-tariff barriers, to get them to stop allowing fentanyl and other drugs to pour into the United States. And there are many other reasons that I think this administration is going to use tariffs. In fact, there was a headline just an hour ago that said Trump is about to put a 100% tariff on Russia if they don't come to a ceasefire agreement or some type of resolution to the war with Ukraine in the next 50 days. So he's going to use this tariff because we are such a large market and because the United States, we buy stuff. We buy a lot of stuff. We are a huge market and every country wants to bring their goods into our market. And if China's charging us in the 30% range, 32% or whatever it was, why shouldn't we be charging their companies to bring stuff in here? If other countries are not allowing our cattle or not allowing our dairy products into their country, why should we not be charging them? That's the idea. That's the thought process in Washington. And I am not fearful at all of what this is going to do. I think it's going to be really good for us by the end of 2025 and into early 2026. It is going to do nothing but bolster our economy. That's my take on it. Thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next episode. We'll see you at the top. Thanks for joining us on The Invested Mindset. To continue receiving these actionable wealth-building strategies, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Turn on the auto-download to ensure you never miss an episode. And if these insights moved you closer to financial freedom, take a moment to leave us a review. It helps fellow entrepreneurs and investors discover these valuable strategies. I'm Tom Berry, and I'll see you next time as we continue building the path to lasting wealth and freedom.